Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the eDiscovery channel. This is Tom O'Connor from New Orleans, Louisiana, flying solo today. Rocky Messing is presently indisposed, and we're actually feeling somewhat fortunate, even though it's the day after Thanksgiving. We literally don't have a hurricane approaching us. It's been several months since there was a time where we went 2 weeks without a hurricane approaching. So I'm happy to have as my guest today Sheila Grela, who many of you I'm sure know from speaking at various conferences, including ILTA. Sheila's I've known you for years. You're currently a paralegal at Procopio in San Diego, right?
That is right.
My second favorite city in the country, San Diego, and so I actually wanted to talk to you about that. We've talked to various different people, some lawyers, some lit support people, but I'm not sure we've actually had a full-time paralegal on to query. So I want to get your perspective about this, about that part of the business. But so tell me, how did you get to be a paralegal? How did you get started in this crazy business of ours?
I am the eldest child of an attorney. So when he went to law school was after his Navy career. And while he was doing it, I was one of those people who would listen, and he would talk back and forth with questions and information. So I did enjoy his law school stint because it was very interesting. And of course, I suffered the normal things that a child who has a parent who's an attorney suffers. Hey, Dad, do you want Pepsi, tea, or milk? Yes. Can you just answer the question? No, form your question better. You know, it is not necessarily emotionally scarring, but you do learn to think differently when you're a parent.
Now, hearing the Navy connection, did you grow up in San Diego?
I grew up all over the U.S., in Florida, Alabama. Brunswick, Georgia was probably my favorite as a child. I really enjoyed the white sands of the beaches,
Right.
and it was beautiful in Georgia. It was very different as far as the view and the being able to walk out into the forest, or go in the timbers and go and look for wild fruit and so forth.
Right.
Both my grandfathers were farmers. So I have a different point of view than most of the people I hear talk about organics and other things. And I just smile and keep my opinion to myself, because I think that a lot of people do not understand the hardship it was for farmers and people there. It was a lot of work.
Yeah. And so did you end up in San Diego, or was that a part of the career? Okay.
No, my father came out to San Diego as part of the Vietnam era people who were on the ship.
Yep.
He was one of the men who helped the carriers run, and was not exactly directly involved in the war effort. But I do remember being old enough to understand things about how difficult that was to be in the war. I do think it definitely is a interesting time in our history, but more importantly, I think people don't realize how many men were affected by having to participate in that. And some of the things that I saw that made me think better of people from that era, I still think about. I still think about, I think it's Larry Biller. And as a child, I walked around with his MIA bracelet, and I remember my father telling the story of a friend of his in an aircraft who didn't make it onto the plane properly. And, the story of him passing away. I think there was a lot of things that happened with that.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a neighborhood girl whose brother didn't come back, and she was my age, and she was never the same. Literally never the same.
I grew up in a Navy family. My My dad served in World War II. My grandfather built submarines in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which was a smaller version of San Diego, but a big Navy town. And of course, I loved it when I first moved to San Diego years ago. It's when I met Browning, Marine. And we used to sit up in his office with his spotting scope and a pair of binoculars and watch the ships coming in and out of the harbor. He of course was a former Navy guy. So my brother was a naval flight officer who he graduated from college he was ROTC. He graduated in 74. So he did some training in San Diego, but he was at the tail end of the Vietnam. So he never saw any active duty over there, but he was on a couple of carriers. He was on the E2, the Hawkeyes, the big radar planes. And his first two, I believe his first two, I shouldn't say that, but at least the first time he went out, it was on a carrier based out of San Diego. So he was.
Well, he could have been on the ship with my father-in-law.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They might have crossed paths.
He was the one who maintained the E2s. He was a chief.
There you go.
In the E2 squad. The man I've been married to for many, many years, I'm not going to say how long because it'd reveal my age, loved airplanes, but because he had a heart murmur, the Navy would not take him.
Oh, okay.
So years later, he was working at General Dynamics. They laid him off. They asked him, would you like to try training as an aircraft mechanic? He secretly smiled and said, yes. And he was one of two men who passed the 6-week course that they had. And that was fate. Right now, he is a curriculum developer for North Island.
Oh, okay.
And he loves his airplanes.
Cool. So how long have you been a paralegal? How long have you been doing this?
I have been a paralegal for over 20 years and been in the legal industry on and off before that, but at least 25 years.
All right. So what's your perspective now? What's it like being a paralegal at you're with Procopio now, right? In San Diego. What's it like being a paralegal in the COVID era?
It's difficult right now. They had a virtual mixer for the first time in June for the San Diego Paralegal Association. And I was shocked at how many people were on it just because they wanted to hear people talk.
Yeah.
And when I asked the question, why, all of them said it's really hard to keep up your feeling that you're getting something accomplished when no one's talking about work in general with each other.
Yeah.
So I talked to Joy and asked her what she thought about the problem. And she was very kind to me, as my mentor always is, and asked me, well, why are you asking me? You must already have an idea what you want to do. And I said, yes. And she says, okay, so tell me what it is. So I told her that I wanted to do an interview show where the purpose was taking leaders and having them talk to paralegals so that they could feel like they were still getting some of the same camaraderie, some of the same tips, and some of the same discussion. And I know you know a little bit about the format because I had you and Gail on, but it varies week to week. It's never the same. And sometimes we've had presentations, but the most important part has always been that it's about sharing mentors with each other. I think it's a huge problem in COVID era to understand how to engage with someone to get that confidence that you normally get from a mentor, and also just to have a general conversation about work. And I'm not talking about the client's problems. I'm talking about work. It's a very interesting thing that people did not realize how much they were doing that before COVID.
Right.
And the vendor aspect has definitely been interesting. Before COVID hit, the vendors were the ones who would host a mix or have an event with an MCLE or do this. But because of COVID, vendors have kind of pulled back and done it in a different sort of way. They no longer are looking to try and help one particular group to try and get their name out. They are just blanketing MCLEs and doing things more to try and get as many numbers as possible. And although that is very good, and I have certainly benefited from it, most recently, I was invited to the Corporate Counsel webinar, and I learned things that I knew I wanted the answers to. And then this brilliant lady comes on screen who obviously had 20 years or more experience leading people and explaining things. And she told me something I've always asked about, and I've been telling everyone I know about it. She explained the difference between mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching. Mentorship is when you talk with someone. Coaching is when you talk to someone. And sponsorship is when you talk for someone. And literally, she had this brilliant slide. And I'm like, I've been asking this for years. I don't know how this woman managed to figure this out, but it was brilliant. And so I've benefited from listening to people in the COVID era talk about things they normally would not have been speaking to me about because of the limits before COVID. And I'm so appreciative. I know that during our relationship, have seen you speak several times. And I know that part of the reason I always like to do it is because I always like to go and talk to the people and hear where they're at, what's exciting for them, what's your next event, how are you going to deal with this particular problem. And I know that every time I've heard you speak, you've brought up an issue that has been in the forefront of what I wanted to know. I think my favorite example is to convert or not to convert with Eddie at the San Diego conference. And everyone's like, well, that's a simple problem. I'm like, no, it isn't, because the ESI protocol is so important and everyone seems to forget it. And you have no idea how many times I sit there and go, if you don't start with that, if you don't start negotiating, everything's going to go sideways. All the attorneys have got to be on the same page. And so when you said that, and by the way, I appreciate your help with that, because I don't know if you know this, but I was asked, as well as June, after you spoke, when I mentioned it to the San Diego County Bar Association, they said, well, why don't you write something? So June and I did write a blog, and we quoted you about your opinions, and as well as a few of the other attendees. But I think that is why I like the live conferences, because if you get the feeling of where people are at and why something has become important. It's very difficult during an MCLE online to get that concept. I do realize there are exceptions, because we always have very dynamic people who, regardless of the venue that they use to present, get that across, but I don't think it's everyone.
No, and it's also the more informal, the casual conversations, the things that you can do at, let's just say, an exhibit hall at a conference like ILTA, where you talk to somebody and somebody else comes along and all of a sudden there's, well, yeah, what do you do with this? That was something Gail found really, really difficult, because she was such a people person. The inability to have that one-on-one or small group contact, what I like to call at a business, the water hole, right? The ability to just sit there and talk about some things over coffee or lunch or after work or in the morning when you first come in. Those informal sorts of discussions, which can be so meaningful and are, I think, the real strength of conferences. And not having that has been, from my perspective, very difficult. As you said, I think from the vendor's perspective, equally difficult. They're not geared for this sort of remote learning sort of approach. And it's been tough. I'm hoping we'll see, some movement back towards opening up a little bit next year. Although the reports coming out from the holiday travel season are not so good. I'm worried about that. I have a daughter who's a emergency room nurse up in the Boston area. She said it's just been crazy. So
will you please thank her for her service?
Sure.
I realize that everyone wants to use that for veterans, but I'm sorry. Anyone who's in a hospital deserves to be
hospital people now, or it's just awful.
Yeah, sorry. If
That's
you
okay.
could tell her that I couldn't praise her enough for her selfishness and courage. And
one thing I noticed about your resume was that you, and I always get it confused, but you got the eDiscovery technology certificate from, now tell me which school it was in San Diego.
UCSD.
UCSD. Okay. I always get them in San Diego State confused, which I'm sure endears me with everybody in San Diego. How was that in terms of usefulness? The whole concept of education and training has one that's been it's been contentious, to say the least. Law schools haven't really picked up the slack, and there's only a few schools that are doing programs like that. Did you find it useful in your career?
I had the benefit of helping them pick teachers. I had previously attended some standalone classes, and Meg Marksberry from DLA Piper, who worked with Browning, was my teacher. And that's where I kind of got started in 2013.
Okay.
And so when they finally had a formal program with a certificate, the question was, how do we get someone to come in and make sure that the people don't understand the concepts, but actually can apply and train? So they chose Christy McGowan, who was a paralegal at the time, and has practiced for over 25 years. She regularly taught concordance. She was someone whose hands were on the back and the front end. It's very rare for a paralegal to actually get both sides of the realm, but she happened to be someone, and she also happened to be a trial paralegal who attended trial with her criminal attorney that she worked with. So her perspective was well-rounded, and so she taught hands-on, and she used technology for the purpose of saying, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to talk about why this works. We're all going to do it in class, and that was fascinating. I realized some of the concepts I had already understood, but seeing the concepts applied in a different software that I had not used was still like setting the concrete. And she was a fantastic teacher. And the lady who runs the program, Julia Dunlap, is an absolute advocate for paralegals.
Okay.
And we could not have someone better to speak for us. So it was great to have people who were actually working on it. And the other person that was involved that you may not know, but you would have met at the San Diego conference was Jeff Binion. Okay, he was just a fabulous teacher all around, but he did the presentation aspect from, they call it here, hot seat operator. I've never been a hot seat operator and only done it from the other side, getting the documents together, putting things ready for trial director. But I know from several of the people who make their living doing that now, that it is difficult to get to the point where you are an expert in actually sitting in the courtroom and doing these things on the fly. And I have true respect for them, whether they be Jeff Binion, who is someone who, as a plaintiff's attorney, did his own trial director, or Shannon Bells, who presently teaches people about how important these things are. And Alicia Kino, who has her own business now, who's paralegal like me, and she now is a hot seat operator for her job in her business. It's been interesting for me to watch how everyone has evolved in their own careers based on the needs of San Diego and what's going on. I know that when I took the ACEDs, it was very rare for paralegals at that time to be trying to, because if someone was doing it, they were doing it because they didn't want to be a paralegal anymore. And so that was never a thought in my head. I always wanted to be a paralegal. So, and I wasn't ever wanting to change to what we call the back end. But I know that Gail, that's how I met her. She called me up and she said, I was given your name by someone at ACEDS, and they said that you might have an interesting story about why you got your ACED certificate. So I explained to her everything, and she really did justice to the story of Browning. But I really appreciate the fact that meeting him at the conference, that he gave away the tickets for free. And that's a story of its own. But DLA Piper had been one of the sponsors. They had extra tickets, and Meg was teaching the students. So she said, do you want to spend Monday at an eDiscovery conference? These are really expensive tickets. We do want people who can use them to come. And so I went, and I spent the entire day in the room with Browning moderating. And it was really interesting because some of the panels were very contentious because they went over things like, how do you evaluate outside counsel with Casey Flaherty and other things. And there were people who were taking positions that ended up being discussion points. Some people during one of the sessions mentioned that they didn't think the judges knew or understood anything. And of course, they didn't know that a prominent Orange County judge was sitting at the table across from me. Yeah, that was an interesting discussion back. But at the end of the day, I had sat through 6 sessions in that room in the same seat. And I was kind of with my back to the pulpit a little bit, just so that I could get the right location and watch people as I was doing this for the first time. And instead of saying, oh, does anyone have a last question? Browning says, I know everyone expects me to ask for a last question. I am not going to. I'm going to ask Ms. Grela a question. I froze. My whole brain went, and then all of a sudden it kicked back over and go, he's an attorney. You talk to attorneys every day, all the time. Get over yourself. And then I did. And that particular event caused Justine Phillips, who is my long-term mentor and someone who was on the board with me when we restarted San Diego Women in eDiscovery. That's why she came and introduced herself to me, because she thought it was special that he had done that.
That's funny. See, once again, the strength of live conferencing. I really hope, next year we're able to start picking up at least a few. I know the folks at ILTA are really committed to doing it if at all possible, even if it's a 50-50. Maybe by August, maybe, assuming we get a vaccine rolling and things turn around a little bit, that might be one. If that happens, it might be one of the first live conferences we get to, because it'll be in the late summer. So,
well, I have to say that meeting people at that event, if I had never have gone, I might never have understood the importance of why eDiscovery is a part of being a paralegal. And that was kind of like a watershed moment for me.
Oh, great.
And one of the watershed moments I've had most recently is a conversation starter that everyone has been enjoying. And that is a recent survey by recruiters of the 6 essential items that employers are looking for. This is not a legal survey. 2 of them are of interest. One is a new title I have never heard before. They call it data capabilities. Then the other is empathy. So I think that
Something all lawyers have in abundance, right?
I assume that's a rhetorical question.
So, I'm sorry, so you said this was a Reuters survey?
No, just a regular recruiter survey. People who
Recruiters.
work with,
Okay.
yes. And
So
the fact it was not legal, and that they
Yeah.
came up with a new way of talking about ESI and
Yeah.
legal tech and
Data capabilities. I like that. I like
yeah.
that.
So yeah, I definitely am going to steal it for Wednesday for our show when we start back next year for the month of February. We're going to do Vegas theme. It's going to be, instead of girls, 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 it's going to be data, data, data.
There you go.
But I definitely think a lot of people are having to rethink their attitude about whether or not they need it when they read that regular corporations and regular businesses are even realizing it's important.
Yes.
And I think that that's another watershed moment.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Great observation. So listen, as I promised, we'll keep this short. We never try to go too long on these things, but I always close with a common question, and that one is, if you were able to spend a day with anyone from our profession, living or dead, and not necessarily talking about business, but just could spend a day with someone who we knew from our profession, who would that be?
Well, I feel like this is a Kobayashi Maru moment that, you can't choose correctly. So I'm going to do a Captain Kirk thing and point out that Browning would love to go to lunch with Gail and I. So it would be the three of us. And I'm sorry. I know you didn't expect me to do that, but I don't know how I could choose between the two of them.
Yeah. Well,
Browning I spent a lot of time doing things other than eDiscovery with Gail. So I know how entertaining the two of us were with each other. And I would like to find out from all the stories I've heard about Browning, how entertaining he was. And obviously he had a sense of humor.
Remarkable guy who could talk about a huge variety of subjects. You weren't at all restricted to our profession. In fact, if you went to lunch with him, he almost invariably would want to talk about other things. Whenever I came to town, he used to like to take me over to a seafood place over on Point Loma. It was sort of a takeout place with right down in amongst all of the piers and the ships there. I can't for the life of me think of the name of it, but we'd get our trays of food and go sit outside at one of the benches and just talk about usually everything except legal in what was going on in our profession. And of course, he grew up in New England, as did I, so we had a lot of heritage stories, if you will, in common, and then the Navy background. But yeah, really well-read, well-spoken guy, could and love to talk about a variety of subjects. So yeah, he's been the not surprising choice of probably half the people who we've interviewed have named Browning as the person they'd like to spend the day with. Yeah.
Well, I would comment that everyone talked about his technical abilities.
Yeah.
But I speak about him from the leadership abilities.
Yeah.
Because in addition to the day I spent with him where he was moderator, I worked with people that he had taught. Yes. And you can truly, truly see a leader when the people that they have taught excel in being leaders themselves because the leader has taught them to be
he was very influential, not just in like you said, the nuts and bolts and the facts, but leadership style and how to work with people. He was great. Yeah, he was a great guy.
I'm recruiting you for the data thing. Just so you're
be happy to.
Just so you know. And,
be happy to. Yep.
It was really hard not to ask you questions back.
Well, you'll be able to flip the script on me then.
Thank you so much. And I want you to know how much your friendship means to me. But I also want you to know that the reason I consider you a leader is because I read your items with the idea that you are trying to teach people to think. And to me, that is such an important thing that leaders don't always know how to do.
Yeah.
And that probably compliment is probably something you hear all the time, but I would like to point that out.
No, I appreciate it. I truly appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. So um, I hope you have a good holiday season continuing on in through Christmas. And hopefully we'll see each other in person sometime next year. If not, you said February for your data event?
Yes, and you might like January too. January is going to be learning, education, and training,
yeah.
and we're going to call it "Let Yourself Succeed." And and any input that you have or anything you want, to call on myself and the San Diego Paralegal Association. We will help you with anything.
All right. Thanks so much, Sheila. Great talking to you and all the rest of you folks. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and we'll have a good Christmas in the upcoming holiday season. We'll see you next time on the eDiscovery channel.
Thank you.